everyone, it's Katrina! From the leper king who led an army of thousands to a dragon queen of a faraway kingdom that still rules today, here are 11 of the most powerful rulers who made history before they were 20. Number 11. Baldwin IV of Jerusalem. Medieval Prince Baldwin IV was 9 years old when he was diagnosed with leprosy. At that time, the disease was a death sentence, and victims were shunned by the community, usually to die a slow death alone. Born in 1161, he was the son of the French Christian king Amalric I of Jerusalem, and so his family protected him and kept him at the palace. When Baldwin IV was just 13 years old, his father died, making him king of Jerusalem. At the time, the French had taken over Jerusalem from the Muslims 75 years before during the First Crusade. The Muslims, led by legendary leader Sultan Saladin, took advantage of this transition and decided to attack. There was no way this sickly young king could maintain order. The Sultan already reigned over Egypt and Syria and wanted to once again reign over the holy city of Jerusalem. Despite his illness and youth, Baldwin IV was by all accounts extremely clever and an excellent horseback rider, even though he could not use one arm. The same year he became king, he launched a successful attack on Damascus to draw Saladin's army away from the famous city of Aleppo. In just 2 years, the leper king continued to harass and attack the Sultan, keeping him away from the Holy Land, making him furious. In 1177, Sultan Saladin led 26,000 men to attack the city of Ashkelon. Baldwin and his army were vastly outnumbered, which is 4,500 men. But when the armies collided, the Muslims were crushed and forced to retreat. The Franks chased them down for 12 miles, and the Sultan barely escaped with his life. King Baldwin was just 16 years old at the time. Known as the Battle of Montgisard, this victory made King Baldwin a hero and beloved by his people. He died at the age of 24 and was succeeded by his nephew. In the movie Kingdom of Heaven, King Baldwin IV is played by Edward Norton. Have you seen this movie? Do you recommend it? Let me know in the comments below. Number 10. Ptolemy XIII Theos Philopator. Ptolemy XIII is the lesser-known boy king of ancient Egypt. He was born in the year 62 BC and became pharaoh 11 years later. He had a pretty miserable time of it. First of all, his sister was Cleopatra VII, and they were co-rulers together. But this family, you know, was extremely ambitious. Cleopatra was 18 years old, and sharing power with her 11-year-old brother/husband? No thank you. Just try to imagine being an 18-year-old girl and ruling all of Egypt with your annoying little brother. Cleopatra must have really hated it, but she didn't have to deal with it for long. It was a strange time in both Roman and Egyptian history. The ruling class of Egyptians feared Cleopatra because of her ambition and power, and the young pharaoh was the only thing stopping her from taking over the country. Within Egypt and the palace, there were various factions, all trying to gain power and control. There were Cleopatra's supporters and Ptolemy's. But then, at the same time, there was a civil war going on in Rome between Julius Caesar and the Roman statesman Pompey. Young Pharaoh Ptolemy wished to make an alliance with Caesar because he seemed more powerful, and so he brutally killed Pompey, Caesar's rival. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria, the pharaoh sent Caesar the head of his enemy, but Caesar didn't like that at all. Sometime during all of this craziness, Cleopatra snuck into the palace at Alexandria to seduce Julius Caesar, and the rest of the story is history. In the end, Ptolemy went to war against Julius Caesar and his sister Cleopatra, but was defeated in 47 BC at the Battle of the Nile. While trying to escape the vicious Roman dictator, the poor boy king was attacked and drowned. He died at the age of only 15. Caesar then took complete control of Egypt and reinstated the dead pharaoh's sister Cleopatra as his co-ruler. Number 9. Ivan the Terrible. Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, was known for his cruelty and violence. He was also the first Tsar of Russia after his father and grandfather fought to unify Russian lands and protect it from outside invaders such as the Ottomans and the Mongols. Born in 1530, at the young age of 3, his father died due to an abscess on his leg that gave him blood poisoning. His mother was technically Queen Regent, but was assassinated 5 years later, leaving Ivan a young boy at the mercy of other nobles and their political interests. The aristocracy was all about getting power for themselves and did not really want a king to rule over them. It is said that instead of educating Ivan and preparing him to rule, they would beat him and lock him up in solitary confinement for days at a time. He was weak and scrawny, probably from malnutrition, and it was most likely during this time that he learned what he needed to do to survive, no matter what the cost. He lived in constant fear, and this must have influenced his ruthless and suspicious nature. Somehow he was able to make alliances with the nobles, and when Ivan turned 16, he was officially crowned Tsar of Russia. He united Russia, which previously had been nothing more than a lot of loosely connected medieval states. He also expanded the borders and paved the way for the monarchy to have absolute power in the following centuries, forcefully taking land and giving it to his supporters. And he did all of this at a very young age. Before Ivan, Russia was kind of a hermit kingdom. He opened the nation to international trade and even began correspondence with England. He conquered the Tartar to the south and annexed the Volga region. Over time, he was more prone to mental instability, but he had so much power the nobles were forced to accept his every demand. They couldn't do anything without him, and so he began torturing, killing, exiling, and destroying everyone who had ever been mean to him, including their children and grandchildren, so they would feel his wrath. After all, they had tortured him as a child, poisoned his mother, and most likely his wife. He controlled the military, the treasury, and administered the courts. He also set up a secret police that had free rein to crush his enemies at home and abroad. During the end of his reign, he became violent with his family, beating them in fits of rage, killing his own children and grandchildren. His reign of terror only got worse, leaving the country in chaos when he died. Number 8. King Oyo of Turo. The youngest king in modern times is King Oyo of Turo from Uganda. Kingdoms were outlawed back in 1967 by the Ugandan government, but reinstated in the 1990s under conditions that the leaders of the individual kingdoms did not have conflict with one another and instead focused on culture. 5 years later, in 1995, King Oyo ascended to the throne at the age of 3. He has been in power ever since, ruling over 2 million people. It's a strange time to be a boy king. In 2021, King Oyo has access to all of the technologies of the modern world, while at the same time ruling a pre-colonial kingdom. He has subjects kissing his feet. He has a throne decorated in leopard skin and wears robes of blue and gold. And of course, he also wears a crown. What kind of decisions can a teenager make to impact his kingdom in this day and age? He mostly makes decisions regarding spending, such as how tax money is spent, which projects to support for health and education, and other building and infrastructure projects. Number 7. Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, Queen of Scots was born in 1542. 1 week later, her father died, making her Queen of Scotland at only 6 days old. When she came of age, Mary was supposed to marry King Henry VIII's son, Prince Edward of England. But the Scots refused the agreement after centuries of fighting. King Henry was so angry that he started a war between Scotland and England. During the war, Mary was sent to France to marry the French Prince Francis II in an attempt to secure an alliance with the Catholics against the Protestant English. She was 15 and he was 14, but weak and sickly. She lived at the French court, and the Scots and the French signed agreements that would unite under one kingdom. When the king died, Mary became queen, but then her young husband died and she was forced to return to Scotland as a young widow. What followed were many years of danger, since she was a direct threat to the Protestant English throne. Many supported her since she was Catholic, and England was in the throes of civil war since Henry VIII had decided to change religions. Her life was full of betrayals, assassinations, and some romance. Mary's last husband was the Earl of Bothwell, who was actually accused of murdering Mary's previous husband, Lord Darnley. Her marriage to the Earl of Bothwell was not well received, and Mary was imprisoned in a castle and forced to give birth there. The twins she birthed did not survive. As for Bothwell, he fled the country and died. Mary escaped from house arrest, gathered a small army, and was promptly defeated. After the death of King Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth I of England tried to avoid the situation with Mary, but in the end, she was too much of a threat and was executed. And now for one of the most famous pharaohs of all. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Thomas Jones, who watches every day, and Skills Killer 1 and fiance. Congratulations, you two. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Origins Explained family. Number 6. Tutankhamun, Boy Pharaoh. Tutankhamun was the original boy pharaoh of Egypt. He was the 12th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, son of Akhenaten, the heretic king. King Tut's father threw all of Egyptian society into chaos after he abruptly forbade the worship of the Egyptian gods and told everyone they could only worship the god he liked the most. Aten, the sun disk. It was absolute pandemonium. After the king's death, his young son rose to the seat of power at the age of only 9, and as is custom in ancient Egypt, he married his half-sister. The first thing Tutankhamun did as ruler was to restore order to the kingdom. He let everyone go back to believing in the old gods, specifically restoring the sacred shrines of Amun. Unfortunately for everyone, not many records of his life exist. Historians also aren't 100% sure how he died. At the age of 18, he was entombed in the Valley of the Kings, not uncovered for another 3,000 years until 1922. He is now the most famous pharaoh to have ever lived, and the discovery of his tomb is one of the greatest finds of the modern world. Number 5. Alfonso XIII of Spain. Alfonso XIII was born in Madrid in 1886. He ascended the throne as king when he was just a baby. King Alfonso XII had died, leaving his wife, Queen Maria Cristina of Austria, as regent. She was dedicated to making Alfonso strong and physically fit. He spent his days swimming, riding, and sailing, and by the time Alfonso was ready to begin making decisions as the King of Spain, when he was crowned at the age of 16, he was a pretty beefy guy. It was not a good time for Spain. They had recently lost Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. The colonial rule of the Americas was officially over. Spain was in great turmoil as a country. A huge Spanish force was annihilated in Morocco in 1923, and the Spanish government was taken over by a military dictatorship which Alfonso supported. But the dictatorship came to an end just 7 years later, and Alfonso was disgraced by his association with them. It became so hard for him in Spain that he had to leave the country to avoid a civil war. He settled in Rome, and in 1931 Spain became a republic. A civil war ensued anyway in 1936, but Alfonso stayed hiding abroad. He spent most of his life in exile and died in 1941. Number 4. Queen Christina of Sweden. Queen Christina of Sweden was crowned in 1632 at the age of 6, after her father, King Gustavus Adolphus Vasa, was killed in battle. Her mother was so distraught at the death of the king and the fact that Christina was a girl and not a boy that she was excluded from being the queen regent. When Christina was a baby, there were several suspicious accidents involving her mother. Before his death, the king had ordered for Christina to be raised and educated as a boy, which was honored by the nobles at court. Christina was known for being a rather unorthodox queen. She ended the 30 Years' War to finally bring peace, which was a pretty big accomplishment. She started a court of learning to promote art and philosophy, bringing educated people from all over the world, including Rene Descartes. Stockholm became known as the Athens of the North. She was ridiculed for being an extremely well-educated woman and for having an unusual interest in the arts. There were also rumors that she didn't like men and was more interested in the ladies, although it's probably likely she enjoyed ruling alone. However, there are many passionate love letters she wrote to both men and women that have been found, but historians do not know for sure about her sexuality. She occasionally dressed in men's clothing and surprisingly converted from Lutheranism to Roman Catholicism. Due to pressures from the court and problems with taxation and governance in general, Queen Christina had some sort of a breakdown and decided to abdicate the throne. She left Sweden and moved to Rome, where she became a favorite in the Vatican and became involved in religious politics. She tried and failed to become the queen of several places, including Naples and Poland. She challenged what it meant to be a woman during that time and has left behind many letters and journals that are helping historians understand who she was. Number 3. Puyi, the last emperor of China. Puyi was the last emperor of China and led a pretty interesting life. He was the only emperor that was ever put on the throne 3 times, despite never being in true power. At the age of just 2, he was brought to the Forbidden City, the great imperial palace in the heart of Beijing, and was made to succeed the dying emperor who had no heirs. He was chosen by Empress Dowager Cixi because she knew that she would still be able to rule behind the young boy. His first reign lasted from between 1908 to 1912. He was kicked off the throne for 5 years and then given his power back by the warlord Changchun. This restored the quickly deteriorating Qing Dynasty for about 12 days before he was kicked off the throne again. Then, between 1934 and 1945, during World War II, Puyi was made ruler of Manchukuo as a puppet of the Empire of Japan. Even though he ruled China 3 times technically, he was never really in charge of anything throughout his entire life, which is probably how he managed to stay alive. Puyi was also the end of Imperial China. After 2,133 years of history, Puyi marked the very end of China's imperial chapter when he was banished as ruler in 1912, and the power was handed over to the Republican Army. This was a very interesting time in history, as Puyi also happened to be the first Chinese emperor that ever spoke English. Between 1917 and 1934, he even took the English name Henry, given to him by his Scottish teacher. Plus, he was the first emperor that ever wore a suit. After the People's Republic of China was established in 1949, he spent 10 years in prison as a war criminal before finally being released and living the last 8 years of his life in modern times as a completely ordinary citizen. The last emperor of China sold tickets at the Beijing Botanical Gardens in the 1960s and died in 1967. Number 2. Jetsun Pema Wangchuck, Dragon Queen. Jetsun Pema Wangchuck is the Dragon Queen of the Kingdom of Bhutan. For those who don't know, Bhutan is a very small nation in Asia that has very little contact with the outside world. You can't even go here as a tourist without getting permission and paying for a special guide who follows you along your journey. Bhutan translates in the local language as the land of the Thunder Dragon. Bhutanese people call themselves the Dragon People, and their ruler is the Dragon Queen. Well, she is not the ruler, but she is married to him. As of right now, she is the youngest queen anywhere in the world. She became the Dragon Queen at the age of 21. Jetsun Pema is an environmental advocate and works closely with children who have special needs. Perhaps she doesn't have such dramatic queenly duties as some of the other young rulers from the past, though she is heavily involved in a handful of very important foundations that help the less fortunate. She is even the president of the Bhutan Red Cross Society and is doing her best to improve people's lives. Number 1. Murad IV, the Sultan. Murad IV is considered one of the mightiest sultans in the history of the Ottoman Empire. He came to the throne at the age of just 11. This was a time when the Ottoman Empire was crumbling under corruption. Government officials were being executed, the treasury was drained, and there was great lawlessness throughout the empire. Murad was born in Constantinople and ruled from 1603 until 1617, dying at the age of 27. However, he did get a lot done, and he ended many lives. As a young boy, Murad IV took his duties as sultan very seriously. He implemented strict rules, some of which included the banishment of alcohol, coffee, and tobacco. According to historians, he was a big drinker, but for everyone else, it was strictly forbidden. He executed anyone suspected of breaking these rules, and was the first sultan to ever execute a Muslim dignitary. He was very cruel and executed people on impulse, anyone who he didn't like, especially women, if they refused him. He famously recaptured Baghdad and had several victories during wartime. He began construction of the Blue Mosque, still one of the most famous mosques in Turkey, and he got rid of the crazy law in which Ottomans who became sultans executed their brothers. He tried to bring order and stability, but as soon as he died, everything once again fell apart. His young and mentally disturbed brother, Mustafa I, was put on the throne in 1617 and ruled for a single year, until a palace faction helped support his other brother, Osman II, to take the throne. But then Osman II was killed, and Mustafa took the throne back in 1622. Thanks for watching! Which ruler are you most fascinated by? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time! Bye!